Our next section is verses 12 through 16 of Mosiah chapter 4. And the question that it specifically asks is, according to these verses, what happens in our lives if we do the things described in verse 11, which is what we talked about before, receiving and retaining a remission of our sins. So what happens once we do that? What happens in our lives? Verse 12 has some gems that I love. It says, I say unto you that if you do this, ye shall always rejoice and be filled with the love of God. So the first thing you will receive is the love of God within your heart. And then later on in the verse, it says, and ye shall grow in the knowledge of the glory of him that created you, or in the knowledge of that which is just and true. So first you will receive the love of God in your heart, and then you will grow in the knowledge of light and truth, or in the knowledge of God. And this really hit me because I love the principle found in Doctrine and Covenants 8, where the Lord speaks to our hearts and to our minds. And that's how he will let us know, receive answers and to prayers and things like that, is through both of those. And here we see that once we do receive and retain that remission of our sins, that's what we get, is we get the love of God within our hearts and the knowledge of God within our minds. He works through both of those to help us throughout our lives.
Isn't that interesting that God speaks to both our heart and our minds? When you look at the world today, I feel like there's this almost like a division. It's where it's like you've got the intellectuals versus the spirituals. You've got the facts versus the feelings. And it's almost a divisive argument. Like if you focus on the intellectual things, you have to ignore all spiritual and feelings.
Yeah.
And on the other side, that person's just all caught up in their feelings and they're not relying on science and this. And I don't like it. I don't like those debates because, like we see right here, is God speaks to both of those things. He blesses us with an assurance in our heart and in our mind. And I think it's more inclusive than we like to, the world's tending to make that it's used more as a divisive strategy.
Well, it's his way to show, like, it's all encompassing. Like, it's truth. And that truth you can't deny with one or the other. You feel it with everything. Yeah. And I mean, sometimes I feel like we will have to rely a little bit more on one, rely on faith when we don't understand something at first, but then that confirmation will come, or rely on what, we learn and we understand before feeling it, maybe, getting that confirmation. But eventually they will both come. Because that is truth and that is God. But that verse 12 kind of focuses on our testimony and our relationship with God. The love of God, the knowledge of God will come to us. Then 13 goes on and it says, if you do this, you will not have a mind to injure one another, but to live peaceably. And I like this because first of all, you focus on your relationship with God, which is the first great commandment. Love God with all your heart, might, mind, and strength. Love God, and then you take that and you turn outward. And you will live peaceably with the others, which is the second great commandment, which is love thy neighbor as thyself. And so once you get that, I just love how they connect. Everything connects there. So you will receive that love of God, and then you will turn and love your neighbor and live peaceably and do everything you can to help others to feel that same thing that you felt with God.
Yeah, verse 15 says, but ye will teach them to walk in the ways of truth and soberness. Ye will teach them to love one another and to serve one another. The beautiful thing about the gospel of Jesus Christ is that when it fills us, our hearts and our minds, when we receive the gospel, when we receive God, when we allow him to impact our lives, we are filled in a way that nothing worldly can compare to. Because when you're filled with God's love, you naturally turn outward. You're blessed in such a way that you want others to be blessed. We see this in the great allegory of Lehi's dream. So Lehi, he partakes of the fruit of the tree of life. So he's on this personal spiritual journey. He's wading through darkness. He progresses on. He relies on prayer. And then he arrives at a destination where he partakes of the fruit of the tree of life. And while partaking of that, he's filled. He's filled with joy and happiness to exceed all taste. I mean, it's a taste analogy, right? So it's such a good taste that it exceeds anything that he's ever tasted before. And the minute that happens, the minute that he's filled with that, he turns outwards and goes, where's my
He
family?
wants to share it.
Wants to share it with others. Where's other people? And that's the beautiful thing about the atonement is you're receiving with a desire of wanting to invite others. And it's natural. It's not something you want to
Well,
work
it's because
at.
it's charity. It's the true love of God. And he loves every single one of his children so much. So I feel like that love is what propels you to want to share it then, because that's what you're full of. And you then love your neighbor so just like yourself, and you want them to have it.
So I guess just kind of going back to the question in this section,
Yeah.
what are the evidences of that happening? It's almost like it's not like an out-of-body experience, but as we are receiving and retaining a remission of our sins, we almost have an out-of-body experience where we see ourselves and we see our lives changing. We have greater desires to act like Jesus would act. We have greater desires to serve. And those things come as a testimony that we have received God in our lives. And so check your desires, check your thoughts and your joys and what you enjoy in life, and as those things are becoming more pure, that's a testament that God is working through us. He's leading us.